We're talking about communications for the new century with Spin Sucks author Gini Dietrich. Welcome, Gini.
Hi, Steve.
Hi. Um, I would like to really get into what is new PR and social communications?
Let's just jump right in. So how the heck are you?
How the heck are you?
What is new PR?
Yeah.
Say that again. What is new PR? All right, fine. I'll answer the question.
What is new in social communications?
New social communications. Well, PR forever stayed the same. It was all about events and reputation management and crisis communication and media relations and public affairs and investor relations. But you pretty much did your job the same way. Nothing really changed. And in 2007, this thing called Twitter came out. And about a year later, Facebook opened up to businesses, and suddenly the social web was like, "Boo! Here we are!" And we had a new way to communicate. But not only did we have a new way to communicate, newspapers were going out of business, magazines were going out of business. All of the relationships that many of us had spent years cultivating with journalists, they were either out on the street, they were out doing their own thing, or they were joining PR firms, going to the dark side. And so you had these relationships where you were able to sell them to clients before, and now those relationships either were working with you or had gone out on their own and weren't, I hate to say as valuable, but not as valuable from a business perspective. And so you had that, and then you had customers that all of a sudden had direct access to companies, where before there was a middleman, there was a spokesperson, there was somebody that they had to go through to get to the organizations, and now they have the opportunity to talk directly to the CEO or directly to the chief marketing officer or directly to the finance guy. And so they do. And they don't go through the middlemen anymore. And so PR has kind of been standing here for the last few years going, what the heck just happened and how do we capitalize on it?
I think that a lot of people, though, have doubled down and started seeing, I think that people have done one of two things. Either they've moved on and embraced a much different kind of role, and I'd love to have you talk about how you see that, or they've doubled down and they're really press release focused and media focused, which is interesting, and it seems to be like a dying strategy. I mean, there's an element for that, so they maintain on, but they're missing kind of their peers moving on to playing a different kind of role in public relations.
Yeah, I think you're right. There are definitely two sides to it, and I come from the PR firm world, so that's the perspective that I have, but as my organization, my PR firm grows and we work with bigger and bigger clients, I've found that many marketers inside organizations still ask for those things. They still want the news releases, and they still want the media impressions, and they still want the advertising equivalencies. And even though we think that's bunk and not worth anything, we still have to provide those things. We have to provide and show the increase in Twitter followers and the increase in Facebook fans and all those things that really mean nothing, while we're educating them on the new way of doing things, and these are the kinds of things. But you have to build the trust, you have to be very strategic, you have to educate, and you still have to provide that other stuff that we all know is not really worth anything, but because that's what they're accustomed to asking for. So you still have the agencies that will do that, and yeah, I mean, if you're Johnson & Johnson or P&G and you're asking for those things, and you're Edelman or Weber or Golan or whoever one of the big firms are, and your client's asking for that, that's what you're going to give them. So you're not evolving. The other thing I think, especially at the big firms, that's happening is they're taking social and they're taking digital and they're adding it on as a profit center, but they're not integrating it. And as you well know, not integrating it doesn't really help. So they, while they say they do it, this digital team doesn't talk to the PR team, and so even though they may be working on the same client, they're going down two different paths.
Let's dig in a little deeper on that. In your sense, what are like the top 5 communication metrics companies must track to kind of monitor the health of their online reputation?
Well, I think you do have to. You have to track what I'll call the vanity metrics, because you have to know. Like, you would know immediately if something was wrong, immediately, if your reach decreases dramatically, or if your engagement decreases, if your website traffic
or shot up.
Yeah, I mean, you would know something's wrong, right? That something had changed. And it would be easy to go in and say, okay, a week ago, our engagement was 1,000 times or 200% better than it is today. What happened? And it could be various things. It could be that you were doing advertising last week and you're not this week. I mean, there's a lot of things that could change it. So I think you do have to track those things, but you also have to track what are people doing when they come to your website? What kinds of things are they reading? Are they downloading content? Are they downloading coupons? Do you have an e-commerce site? Where are they going through the process? Do they get to the shopping cart and not buy? You know, what you have to track those kinds of things. Are you tracking the leads? Are you coming in? Are you tracking them through the process? And are you tracking them as they convert? So you have to combine both the vanity metrics and the real business metrics.
So you're saying that actually what people need to do is they need to either have a tool like Google Analytics or something else that's similar to that, where they're actually tracking behavior on the website and information journey. So they're tracking all that kind of stuff, and they use that as a way to help guide whatever their communications activities are.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, when you're paying attention to that kind of stuff, I mean, we had a staff meeting earlier that we talked about that. The Spin Sucks traffic is tracking along, at about a consistent pace, and it's interesting because we've been trying new and different things, and it's not increasing it, it's just tracking along at the same pace. And so because we pay attention to that, we're able to dig in and see what some of the causes are. And some of the referral traffic from Twitter, for instance, is down. So that we see that some of that is the cause of it. So you're able to kind of dig in and look at that data and figure out what's going on.
What are 3 things that B2B brands are not doing now, but they need to start doing right away?
I think it depends. One of the things that I see, particularly among B2B organizations, is that they say, oh, social's for consumer businesses, and they sort of poo-poo it and set it aside. And that's not the case. I mean, is Facebook the right place for a B2B organization? Probably not, but LinkedIn is. Google Plus definitely is. So pay attention to where your customers are already hanging out, and not poo-pooing it entirely, but paying attention to where you should. Pinterest probably not a good place for you, but Google Plus definitely a good place. So I would say that many B2B organizations, especially as I spend a lot of time out on the road speaking to CEOs and business owners of B2B organizations, I discovered that there's no lead generation mechanism. If they have one, it's a newsletter that doesn't have, that's all about them and doesn't have any links in it, and there's no way to track. They're tracking opens, and I always want to go, okay, you guys, just because somebody has it in their inbox could be counting as an open, so you can't use that as a metric. So I think that's a big mistake. And the other one is that they're not taking that and converting it to or attaching it to their CRM, so that they can say, okay, we have traffic coming in from Twitter, for instance, or LinkedIn, for instance, that's on this specific content, and we see an increase in web traffic from this type of content, and then we're tracking them through the process as it's related to our customer relationship management software. They're not doing that.
I know one of the things that you've been passionate about is ethics, and which is one of the reasons you named your website and your book, Spin Sucks. And so in a socially connected and digital age, how have public relations ethics changed?
I don't know necessarily that it's changed so much as that people are getting caught. Because it used to be that you would hire a PR person or a team or a firm, and they would create your messages, and then they would put you through media training and teach you how to use those messages. And during media training, you'd learn how to block and bridge. And I mean, I did this as part of my career too. You teach people that are going to talk externally, both to employees, to media, to customers, how to take, and you'll see this with politicians, it happens all the time, where they'll be asked a question and it's not something they want to answer, and so they'll say, I can't talk to you about healthcare today, but what I can talk to you about is, and then going back to their message. So that's called blocking the question and bridging to something that they want to talk about. Well, that's how it all worked out in the beginning, and now that's completely been turned on its head, and we are not in control of our message anymore. Our customers are. And so when you practice those kinds of things, or when you send a non-apology apology where you don't actually say you're sorry but you're apologizing, or you're spinning the truth, or you're stretching the facts, or you're creating whisper campaigns against your competitors, or you're developing fake accounts to say negative things about your competition or positive things about you. Those kinds of things are going to be caught very, very quickly, because people on the web, there are people with lots of time on the web, and they like to prove that the internet is wrong, and so they will find you out. And I don't think that necessarily the ethics of people have changed. It's just that it's a lot easier to that stuff comes to the surface fairly quickly.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that your brand position, what's really happened in terms of brand, is that it's more quickly updated, either negatively or positively, because of the flow of communications now, and you need to be, people who used to be able to lie and get away with it for some period of time
right.
aren't given that privilege any longer.
Right.
You've been in the business for a few years.
5 years is all. I mean, I don't have any gray hair or anything yet.
What's your best social communication war story?
Man. I don't know if I have one from a social perspective.
What about your best war story, communications war story?
Okay, so I worked with the Catfish Institute, and it was a great account to work on. Everybody gives me that look when I say it. It was a great account to work on. The president was a really good friend of mine. We had worked together previously, and we had a great relationship, still have a great relationship today. So our job as the PR firm that specialized in food was to get people to order catfish in white tablecloth restaurants, because catfish is known as a bottom feeder. It dwells on the bottom of the river. It eats all the crap, the mud, the screws, the trash, whatever happens to be in the river. Catfish eat it. So 10 years ago, instead of growing cotton and tobacco, these farmers created catfish farms, and they fed the catfish at the top of the river, at the top of the water, so that they weren't able to go down. They were full enough by the time they got fed that they wouldn't have to go down and feed on the bottom. So they were clean. They weren't, crappy fish. And anything that you prepare with catfish, it takes on the flavor of. So if you're using herbs or spices, it takes on that flavor. So we created a campaign to get celebrity chefs to use catfish on their menus, and then there was a contest, and it was a ton of fun. Did a lot of really fun stuff in New York with the food editors, worked with Bobby Flay and Elizabeth Terry and Emerald. I mean, it was a really fun account to work on. But there was this whole issue with the Japanese bringing catfish into the U.S. It's called dumping catfish into the U.S. and calling it U.S. farm-raised catfish. So they would just place a label on it saying it had been raised in the U.S., but it actually was Japanese, and they had sent it over here. So there was this whole big regulatory and lobbying effort to stop this. And from the consumer perspective, part of our job was to really educate people about what it meant to be farm raised in the U.S. So we have a media tour. And we 60 Minutes, or I think it was 60 Minutes. Comes and says, we'd love to visit the catfish farms. We'd love to see what this is about. We want to do an in-depth. Well, as you know, 60 Minutes is not. There's usually some sort of investigative something, and so we brought in the big gun media trainers. I mean, the big gun media trainers, and from D.C. flew them down to Mississippi, and because I was the lead on the account from a consumer perspective, I got to sit in the meeting. 3 days of media training, 3 days. And we went through everything, U.S. farm-raised catfish, bottom dwellers, the whole thing. And over and over and over again, we can't answer, because we're under legal obligation, we cannot answer any of the Japanese dumping issues right now, because there's legal issues and all this stuff. So if it comes up, here's how you need to answer it. So 60 Minutes comes, they spend a couple of days. It was great. It was like the pinnacle of my career. As we are packing up and getting 60 Minutes on the elevator, the president says, literally, as they're stepping onto the elevator to leave, I'm so glad you didn't ask me about the Japanese.
Just for anybody who doesn't know that, that's almost a classic thing you tell clients not to do, because so many times that's happened in journalism where people will say things in the elevator. You're never off the record with the journalist.
Never.
Even if they tell you that, you're never off the record. And that's almost...
I mean, cameras have been put away, microphones have been put away. They were literally getting on the elevator. And that's what he said.
That's really...
And of course, guess what the story was about? It wasn't about the 2 days that we just spent in on the catfish farms.
That's... Well, let's talk about, so let's say that there's been a problem. What can brands do to repair damaged online reputation and overwhelming negative comments?
So there's a couple of things that need to happen. First of all, what happens, and as you watch this stuff unfold, you begin to realize that people get really defensive and they take things personally. You have to not do that. You have to be able to step back and say, okay, wait a second, what's going on here? Why is this happening? And what's our strategy? Because when you start to see these things create, the firestorm starts to build, is when the company starts to flip-flop. And they don't really understand what their strategy is, or they go against what their strategy is because they're kowtowing to the social media mob. So you have to keep in mind your strategy. You have to keep your personal feelings out of it and not get defensive. And you have to say I'm sorry, and not the non-apology apology, not the I'm sorry but, or the I'm sorry I hurt your feelings but. That kind of stuff is not an apology. Like, really say I'm sorry. Here's what we're going to do to solve it. And then if it's something that's bad and it's something that you've done, like Susan Komen's a great example, or Penn State's another really good example. It's going to take you a long time to repair that reputation. And there are lots of organizations that'll say, pay us $5,000 and we can take the negative stuff off the first page of Google. It's impossible to do that. The only way you can even move that kind of stuff is to continually create great, consistent content that people like, that they want to share, that they are commenting on, that they, that's the only way to do it. It takes time, and you're never going to remove it from the first page. It's always going to move to the second or third. So don't get defensive. Don't take things personally. Say I'm sorry and fix it.
One of the things that always amazes me when brands have, just an example, if it's something like where a company does something that's not offensive but nobody likes it, like the Gap logo is
right.
Example.
It's a great example, yeah.
What happened though is they blinked and then they went go back to the old Gap logo, and to me that was, and there's been almost all these things that are like that. There's a missed opportunity. Instead of blinking and looking like you just don't know what you're doing, you say, gosh, you know what? That's interesting. We should have asked you guys. Let's start. All you people who are upset, let's have a conversation now about that and bring you into the process.
Right.
And
what's even interesting about that too, which is a great example, is it was less than 1% of their customers who were in an uproar. Less than 1%.
And here's an opportunity. People spend so much money wanting to engage with customers, and I understand it's negative and it's scary.
Sure.
But here's an opportunity to literally turn these people into passionate brand advocates.
Yep.
Things are changing so fast. I've watched with some sadness people who seem like who were great communicators in their day, and they've seemed to I've watched a lot of people leave the industry, retire, because they didn't keep up on what's going. They thought things were just a fad. I'm not, I came, I've been in the industry for marketing and stuff for about 30 years. And maybe it was because when I came in, things always change. Every few years, I had to learn new technologies and stuff. So I'm used to always be learning. What would your counsel be to communicators on how to stay relevant and keep their skills relevant?
Read Spin Sucks.
I think.
No, I'm joking.
Well, no, I would say that that's absolutely true. But what else? That's.
I think it's hard because, and it's a phenomenon that we talk about often just among my friends, because you watch your friends go through this, and you reach a certain age where you go, wow, when did we all get so curmudgeonly and not want to learn anything? And your friends are going, I'm not going to get the new iPhone because I can't type with on the screen. I have to have my button. Like, really? When did you get like that? I mean, so I think it's being, in your 20s and 30s, you're very open to change and you're very willing to try new things and you're excited about those kinds of things. And I think 40 and older, you kind of go, I don't have time, I have other responsibilities, whatever it happens to be, but we stop learning. And your point about always be learning, I think I think we as human beings reach a certain age where we just stop. And I'm with you, you have to keep learning. And I think that's why baby boomers get such a bad rap with social in general, is because it's a stereotype, but it's a stereotype for a reason. They stop learning and they stop using the tools or wanting to learn the tools because they're kind of like, eh. Now there are some that don't behave that way and are great on the social networks and are, have built successful businesses or successful personal brands because they're willing to it. But I think that's the issue, is that we just stop learning. We let life get in the way and we stop learning.
I think that's true. I think people have always I've always been attracted to are folks, folks who are older, closer to my age now than they used to be, but older people who always had a passion about staying involved and learning new things. And I think you're right that when people fall behind us, they get comfortable, because as you get older, you start to know things really well. And I think people become intellectually lazy because learning something new is hard. It's always a challenge, and it's always frustrating to take 15 minutes to learn to do something that used to take you 2 seconds to complete.
Right.
And I think that frustration is like, sometimes you just need to suck it up and learn something that hurts. And in our case, it's, that happens. You need to be if you're always doing something, if you're always learning, it's not going to hurt as much.
Right. And I just can't imagine. Can you imagine not reading or paying attention? Or I can't imagine. Maybe someday I'll eat my words, but.
I think the problem is that I think the problem often is that people look at the amount of information they could read or things that they could do, and they get overwhelmed.
True.
And I think that Twitter is actually a really good example. When I first saw Twitter, I thought of Twitter, and this is back in the day, as like almost emails. Like, how can I keep up with all these tweets?
Right. Yeah.
And that's the wrong approach. The approach is it's a river, and you get into the river when you can, and you get out of the river, and that's the experience. And reading is the same way. I read probably like you. I read a tremendous amount of content for this, for the creation stuff that I do, and so I'm always reading. I don't think you need to do what I do, but I think you could spend, every day, if you had, if you went and looked at the best blogs and the best tweeters, and updated that every month or two, learn a new blog, and then had an RSS reader or a special email account where you had blogs go to, and you read two blogs a day. Which is not, that's 10
8 minutes. Yeah.
8 minutes.
Exactly. Yeah.
And just do that, and just read different people, and then try to bring new people into that as an kind of curate bloggers. Mm-hmm. You're going to have you're going to know more than 90% of your colleagues.
Yep. Or even use like a Medium that introduces. They introduce new authors constantly, so you don't even have to curate it yourself. Just go to Medium.
So, I talk about how brands should strategically approach paid, earned, shared, and owned media. I don't know what shared is. I don't know. I wrote that question. How could you?
I put social under shared. I don't put it under owned.
So how would you say they should strategically use paid, earned, and owned media?
Well, here's what's interesting is we have found probably in the last, not quite a year, almost a year, where journalists have said to us, we are happy to have this relationship with you, we want to write this story, but we need your help. And we need your help because we are incentivized and get to keep our jobs based on increasing page views. So if we're going to write this story for your client or for your organization, we need to know that you're going to share it, and we need to know that you have the capability to do that. So, if we're representing a client, they want to know that the client has their own blog, that the client has their own social networks where they're engaging with people, they have their own community where people know, they're influencers and people are willing to read. So if they write an article about the client or produce a piece about the client, they want to know that client can share, that organization can share that and help them increase their page views. So because of that, and it really has been in the last year, integration has become even more important. I've always been touting integration, but I think it's even more important now because so you have your earned media, which is media relations, and you're talking to journalists, and they're like, okay, yeah, we're happy to do that. So then you take your own media and you say, okay, well, let's do a behind-the-scenes piece for the blog where, you know, some of the questions that were asked and answered that didn't make it into the piece, the journalist piece, or let's film behind the scenes where they're walking through the office together, or they're on Skype together and having a conversation, and let's include that in the blog post. You know, the behind the scenes stuff that don't ever make it, and then link to that article. And let's share not only the article on your social networks, but also the behind the scenes kinds of stuff. So you're integrating all of these pieces into it together, so that you know, it's the quid pro quo. So you're growing your stuff, they're growing their stuff, and everybody's happy.
I think that's absolutely a brilliant idea. I think that makes a lot of sense too, and it also shows companies why they need to have a healthy, robust platform of their own, one that's being managed proactively, as opposed to, unfortunately, a lot of people's blogs and such are basically these communications sewage pipes that just poop out whatever they happen to be wanting to self-love that day.
Yes.
That's how I feel often. You know, one of the things, you self-published your book recently, and you had a brilliant strategy, and it's been a very successful launch. And you've worked with publishers before, but you've had I think a brilliant model for an ambassador program, and I would say that it could be used in a lot of different ways for companies, not just launching a book, but other people want to create exciting ambassador programs. Could you talk about your program, what you did, the components, and kind of your thinking, and kind of the holistic approach, and what some of the actions were?
Well, first, I didn't self-publish it. Pearson published it. They have first right of refusal.
Oh.
For my books, so anything future they get to publish. But one of the things that I did with Marketing in the Round, which I wrote with Jeff Livingston, is that I did 63 trips in 1 year when that book came out. And it was great for business, and the business increased significantly, and the long tail effect was very good, you know, that it kept going after the book tour and the book launch and everything. But it nearly killed me. And I didn't get to do things that I love to do, you know. I mean, I didn't get to ride my bike and, you know, things like that. And I wasn't running my business. I was just like, okay, you guys, I'm out again, and so go do your thing. So while we were bringing in new clients because of that, there wasn't any real process and no onboarding and no new employee onboarding or anything like that. So it became a little tenuous is probably a good word for it. So this time I decided that obviously there are going to be some speaking things and book tour signings and stuff you have to do, but I wasn't going to do more than one trip a week this year. So we created a brand ambassador program, and I, you know, going out and listening to other successful authors, Jay Baer, Michael Hyatt, some other people, I stole some ideas from them. I gave them credit, so I guess it's not exactly stealing, and then I, you know, created, because we have such a big community on Spin Sucks, I wanted to use that passion and loyalty that we had spent the last 8 years building. So we set up an application form, and I think at the beginning of February, the book came out at the end of March, and we asked people to apply. We had 822 people apply, and we narrowed it down to 150. We did it based on a few things. One, if you were active in the community, you obviously were in no matter what. Two, we wanted to make sure that it was represented globally. So even though if you were in Canada or the UK or Australia or wherever you happen to be outside of the US, it didn't count for sales because the lists only count US-based sales, but I still wanted the awareness globally. So those people got in. And then if you had a blog that was well-read or social, you know, active social networks or anything like that, then obviously you would get. So we narrowed it down to 150, and it was not easy. We created a private Facebook group, which was both the best idea and the worst idea I've ever had, because I I mean, I think you know me well enough to know that I'm very active, and Kelly, my husband, makes fun of me all the time because on my birthday I have to respond to everybody's Facebook message, and I do. I respond to them all. He's like, you don't have to do that, but for me,
you are truly the most engaged social person I know.
But that's just it's my personality. I think it's that innate need to be liked because I want people to like me. So, if I'm being honest, I think that's probably what it is. But so you have 150.
You like me. You really like me.
I know you like me. I'm Stuart Smalley. So managing that Facebook group was really intense for 6 weeks. I mean, it was intense because people were really passionate, and there were probably about 10 people who sort of took it and ran with it, and became advocates inside the Facebook group. And it was really fun. And then during launch week, I communicated daily with, here's where we are with numbers, here's where we are with people who are writing reviews. So we ended up with 80 reviews on Amazon, probably 20 or 25 on Barnes & Noble. I'd say about the same on Goodreads. We did not hit #1 on Amazon. We hit #2, which is very disappointing to me. But and then the top 200 book scan, which the publisher pays attention to, we were in the top 50. The one big goal that we had was to make the New York Times bestseller list, which we did not make, which was really disappointing to me. And I think the biggest thing I learned from all of this is that bulk sells are the way to go. I mean, if you have a goal like that, you have to get organizations to buy 500, 700, 1,000 copies at once. Otherwise, you just can't make it. Because the guy who was at the bottom of the list that week sold 15,533 books. That number is ingrained in my brain. And we sold about a third of that.
So it sounds like the keys were, I heard a couple of things other than like going through an application process, thinking strategically about who you're going to pick out of your application process and why you're going to pick them out. Engaging them in a format where you're having ongoing communication. And what I took from your best and worst ideas, it was not, I want to say time sink, but it was a time intensive activity.
It was very time intense, yes.
And the other thing which I heard you say, which is that you actually included everybody as part of this program in the numbers that you were making, which I think is fascinating. It's really, I love that transparency.
Yeah, I was very transparent about it. The one thing I couldn't say is exact numbers of books sold because the publisher won't let you do that. But how
did you communicate that information?
I rounded up for them. So like I just said, we did a third of that. So you can guess, right?
Got it.
The other thing that I thought was really interesting is that about 50%, I'd say 47 or 48% of those who applied and were accepted did not participate at all. So they got the free book and were never to be heard from again. So I'm not sure how you can prevent that.
Would you have increased the number of ambassadors, knowing that in hindsight? Would you increase the number of ambassadors to compensate for that?
I don't know if I would because it was so hard to manage. Yeah, I mean, it was pretty hard to manage without it being 160 people. I would say it was closer to 80, 85 people. So maybe you could increase it another 25 to be sure that you got. I mean, it was
offset it a little bit.
Yeah, it was intense. I think the disappointing thing for me was, just as a human being, was people not stepping forward and saying, I committed to this, but I can't fulfill it, which is totally fine. Can I give my spot to somebody else? Because there were so many other people that didn't get the opportunity. So I think that's the most disappointing part from the brand ambassador, but I'm not sure how you could avoid that.
Right.
I mean, you're going to have people who commit that just don't do anything.
Beyond what we just talked about, what is something you learned that you wouldn't do again, and what is something you wish you had done?
Well, I wish I had been really strategic about the bulk buys, going to universities and to organizations that have big trade shows and asking them to buy and waiving my speaking fee, for instance. I did do that, but I did it too late, and organizations just couldn't get the funds together quickly enough. So I would start that probably in advance. The other thing I would do is, one of the things we recommend to clients is starting your media relations 6 months in advance, and we started it about 6 weeks in advance. So all that stuff is now coming to fruition, which is great. it's working, but it would have been nice to choreograph that all together. The one thing I wish I had done that I didn't, I don't know. I think probably I would have had a more formal application process, and when I discovered people weren't participating, to kind of call them on the carpet privately about it and say, hey, you know, reading a book is not an easy undertaking. Totally understand that. Can we give your spot to somebody else?
Ginny, I thank you so much. Those are all great things. Thanks so much for joining me. I always enjoy your company, and hopefully we'll see each other in real life soon.
I know. I haven't seen you in 2 years. Totally baloney.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.